Hi, this is Owen Robertson, and in this video we're going to be talking about constipation. What it is, what causes it, how to resolve it if you have it, and how to prevent it to make sure you never have it again. So this is a video that is perhaps not the most popular topic to talk about, but it is super important, because if you have constipation, especially if you have it chronically, if you have it frequently on an ongoing basis, then it can really ruin the quality of your health, but also the quality of your life. Like, it's a really a serious thing that in and of itself is not the end of the world, but the knock-on consequences that come from having it on an ongoing basis are pretty severe. So it's very important to address. Of course, I have to clarify that none of this is medical advice. I'm not Dr. Owen Robinson. So everything that I teach you here is based on a non-medical situation. Of course, if you have a medical situation, you need to see a doctor about it. So before we go on, let's just quickly clarify what is constipation, right? A lot of people, the simple definition is an inability to go to the toilet, right? An inability to defecate. But that is kind of a vague definition, because that would imply that if you're unable to go in that moment, then you have it, but as soon as you are able to go, you no longer have it. So that's generally not the definition that I use, although of course, it's up to you. The definition of constipation which I use is having a bowel movement less than once every meal. Now, it doesn't mean you have it at the same time as the meal, but what I'm saying is if you eat, say, 3 times a day, which is the average for people, then you should be going to the toilet 3 times a day. May not be exactly, after the meal, but often first thing in the morning is a good time. But yeah, basically, if you're only going once a day, unless you're only eating once a day, you are constipated by this definition. So why is this important? Why is it important to set a fairly high bar as to what it means to not be constipated? Because the effects of constipation are so devastating to the body. So let me describe that a little bit. And then if you check out the video underneath where it talks about how to clear out the intestines as well as the liver and the lymph, then in that video I go into more detail with this. But let me just give you a snapshot. So when your large intestine is blocked, your body's not able to absorb water so well, so often you can end up dry and dehydrated. Your large intestine is also not able to absorb minerals as well as it should do, so that can lead to deficiencies, usually especially alkaline minerals. But that's actually the least of it. The problem is that the large intestine is at the end of a long digestive but also eliminative process, and if that gets blocked, then it means that everything else grinds to a halt as well, to various degrees, and that's a very bad thing. So let me continue. So if the large intestine is blocked, then the small intestine will tend to start building up waste. Now, whereas the large intestine is fairly easy to clean, and when we get to this section, you'll learn how to clear it, pretty easily. The small intestine is much more difficult to clear, especially once waste builds up in there, once parasites build up in there, mucus, candida, all of that kind of stuff. Once that starts building up, plaque, often we talk about as well. Once all that stuff starts building up in the small intestine, it creates a cascade of all kinds of other problems, right? So when you start to get blocked, and why is the small intestine much more likely to get blocked? Because it's about 30 feet, it's got about 150 corners, it's kind of all wrapped around and jumbled in this kind of area around the navel, but it's a big area. Like, it actually takes up a lot of volume, way more than you think when you look at a medical textbook. And in people with like a large belly, larger than myself, it may take up way more area still, right? Oh, and gas as well. If gas gets stuck in there, that can create all kinds of problems. So then when that stuff starts to get stuck in the small intestine, what happens? Well, first of all, it means that the villi are not able to absorb nutrients as well anymore. So the villi are like little tendrils that reach out into the food that's going past to absorb it. But if they are blocked with waste and other stuff like I just mentioned, then they're not able to do that. So bottom line is you start to become nutritionally deficient. Also, if you actually start to have organisms in there, which is an unpleasant idea, but in my experience, the vast majority of people do, then they also start creating their own waste. Plus, even if you don't, just the fact that you have stuff in there that's rotting and not moving through as quickly as it should be, that will attract organisms by itself, pathogenic organisms, and they in turn create their own waste. So then these villi, not only are they not absorbing the nutrition that you need, but they're starting to absorb waste. And from the villi, it gets taken up into the liver and then transported throughout the body. So that's a serious situation. A lot of that waste is acidic, and so then that leaves our body overly acidic. And again, that gets transported into the blood and creates all kinds of other problems for all kinds of other organs, especially the kidneys that have to filter that blood, the pancreas, which is in charge of making enough sodium bicarbonate to balance the excess acidity that this situation is creating. Now, when the small intestine is backed up, your liver does a lot of stuff, like way more than I would have time to talk about in one of these videos, even though if that's all I was talking about. It does loads of stuff. But to really simplify, we can say that it makes hormones, that it distributes blood and nutrients, that it detoxifies, and that it helps to digest various things, especially fat, protein, alcohol, certain kinds of sugar like fructose. It's involved in dealing with digesting a lot of stuff, and it's detoxing, or for those people who don't like that word, it is processing poisons and other kind of metabolic wastes into a less harmful form. Now, here's the interesting thing about the liver. When the liver is finished doing its processing of different kinds of waste, the liver doesn't have like like the liver's around here. The liver doesn't have like just a little hole here to just like spit out that waste that's being processed. And often, in the process of processing, it's actually made even more, toxic and refined, like in the case of alcohol, for instance. So it doesn't have a hole going out here. What it does is have a hole via a gallbladder into your intestinal tract. But meaning the liver, when it's dumping its waste, dumps it into the intestinal tract. If the small intestine is blocked because the large intestine is blocked, then the liver starts to not be able to dump its waste. That's where it starts building up bile. If you've ever done or seen pictures of people who do liver flushes, you see all kinds of biles built up in there, cholesterol is built up in there, calcification is built up in there, which is where people get gallstones or liver stones. Parasites can end up in there. And then when the liver doesn't work properly, again, you're not able to digest fat and protein properly. You're not able to distribute nutrients properly. You're not able to have the correct hormones. You're much less likely to be able to deal with any other poisons that you take in or that your body naturally creates. And I've only scratched the surface. This is like a huge chain reaction of problems. That's just an example, all of which start with just not being able to go to the toilet. And honestly, that was just scratching the surface. So I definitely recommend that you check out the video below, where we're talking a lot more detail about what it takes to clear all of those eliminative organ systems to fully understand the difficulty of the situation and, of course, how to get out of it. Okay, so we're clear on this definition of constipation, right? Less than once every meal. We're clear on why this is a bad thing and not just no big deal. So let's get into it. So we always focus in these videos on the causes first, because the recommendations just often don't make sense if we don't understand the causes. So we will talk about the 8 main causes first, and then we'll get into some immediate action steps you can take to feel better, immediately or very quickly. And then we'll talk about some more permanent solutions in addition to that to really get to the root of the problem. And the reason I'm not just putting like one thing here and one thing here is because life generally isn't that simple. It's very rare. I mean, sometimes like for you, maybe you might have constipation because of only one cause and you need to do only one thing to fix it. And if that's true, then fantastic, right? That's great. But generally, any situation like this is down to several different causes that correlate and kind of work together. And so you need to do several different things to actually resolve it. And if you only address one cause and only address one action step, then it may produce some improvement, but then you're not completely better yet. This approach has really been honed over years of helping people in the real world and seeing that kind of like textbook answers of like one symptom, one cure. That's not the way it works, right? So anyway, let's get into it. So we start with focusing on the things that are like the most obvious or the most well-known. So in the case of constipation, one of the main causes, of course, is a bad or just inappropriate diet. The reason I make a distinction there is bad. What's bad? So bad is junk food. Bad is stuff that everyone can agree is bad for you. You know, sweets and donuts and fast food, McDonald's, right? We all know that's bad for you. So that's obvious. And if you're doing any of that stuff, that's not helping, almost certainly, right? In a few cases, it may do for reasons that we'll go into, but certainly it's not helping the long-term situation, and usually it's not helping on an immediate basis either. Inappropriate is a little bit more difficult though. There could well be things that you believe are good for you, right, that you've been told are good for you, but because of the way your particular digestive system works, it actually contributes towards constipation. So an example of this for me is that when I try to follow a particular kind of vegan healthy diet, one of the things you're encouraged to do to get enough calories is eat, and also proteins, to eat nuts and seeds. Now, there's very few people who will say like nuts and seeds are bad for you, so long as they're fresh and raw and unprocessed and all the rest of it. Most people would agree that it's good for you. That's both in the mainstream and the alternative. And it is good for a lot of people, but for someone who has a very specific body type, that was actually really not helping me, and that was constipating me. Ditto for bananas, for instance, like the innocent banana. If I were to eat that or include it in my smoothie, it would block me up, right? And when I was in Southeast Asia a few years ago, I was talking to someone, and it was Bali, an area where diarrhea is a fairly common issue because of parasites there. And they said one of the cures that they recommend to people to prevent them or to cure the diarrhea is to eat bananas, right? So I was like, oh, okay, so it is kind of like a constipating agent to some degree. I'm not the only one who's found that, but just an example, right? And again, it does depend on the body type. Bananas are not going to do that for everyone. Nuts are not going to do that for everyone. I'll take a brief digression actually and just talk about my history of constipation. So I never thought of myself as someone who had constipation because I would go to the toilet. But the thing is, and I'm saying this only because I think there's a good chance you're going to relate to it. The thing is, I used to smoke all day, every day, tobacco and cannabis. I used to drink coffee all day, right? And so even though I ate like a really unhealthy diet, lots of things that generally do lead to constipation, and for me, you know, it depends on the person, but for me that would be like dairy, that would be like wheat and gluten, sugar, things like that. Those really created a situation inside me where I would have been constipated, but because I was having fairly powerful laxatives, like strong coffee, espresso like I used to have is a powerful laxative, and cigarettes to some degree are a powerful laxative as well. So I didn't realize how constipated I would be if I weren't constantly doing things that were bad for me, which had a laxative effect. And the thing is, while laxatives are temporarily, like they will unblock that large intestine, so they will help with that situation I just talked about, the problem is that they do it by irritating the intestine. And then over the weeks, months, years, and even decades that you're used to using laxatives, and I'm talking about common things like tobacco, like coffee, like chocolate, you know, things like that. When you're used to using those kind of laxatives, the things that are bad for you, then when you stop having those things that are bad for you, it can lead to a situation where you become constipated. And so when I stopped having all the stuff that was bad for me and was eating a healthier diet, it was like a healthy diet, loads of vegetables and fiber and all of that kind of usual advice. But the distinction was that my intestines were already so irritated that I had a lot of other problems, but also they were used to having laxatives to irritate them to go to the toilet. So then when I removed those laxatives, I was left with like a lack of ability to go to the toilet, and this created all kinds of, or you know, not totally, but to a worrying degree, and this is where I had to discover all of this stuff, right? So anyway, let's get into the next thing. So next most common cause is dehydration. One of the main challenges with the intestines, so if you were not experiencing constipation, then what would be happening is that your intestines would be having a frequent and effective peristalsis process, which is a little bit like the way a snake moves, like undulating like a snake, and it it kind of squeezes and massages and moves it through. Now, one of the things that prevents that happening properly is dryness, when you're too dry. And that can happen, dehydration itself can be caused by several things. It can be caused by a lack of water, of course, like a lack of drinking water, but it can also be caused by a lack of electrolytes, which I've also put as a separate point because there's a little bit more to that. But if we lack electrolytes, then generally we're not thirsty, but we could be really struggling without lack of water. It's just that we're also lacking electrolytes, so we don't want to drink water. It's a tricky situation, and the link underneath the video talks more about that whole dynamic of hydrating, alkalizing, getting the right electrolytes, all that kind of thing, which is super important. But you can also be dehydrated for lack of electrolytes, and you can also be dehydrated just for the environment. Like if you are in a desert, or the most extreme example that most human beings face is if you're in a plane, right? Especially like a long haul plane flight where the humidity goes down to like less than 10%, then that really dries out your body, it really dehydrates you. And this is one of the reasons why famously like long distance airline travel messes with your digestion, because it dries you out, your intestines are not as able to keep moving, and you get stuck, and then all those problems occur that I talked about earlier. So super important, dehydration and lack of electrolytes. Also, now when I talk about lack of electrolytes, as well as helping to hydrate, there's one specific electrolyte which is probably the most important for peristalsis, and that's magnesium. So magnesium is one of the minerals, along with iodine, that we're most deficient in the Western world. And it's extremely important, crucial for hundreds of different chemical processes in the body, all kinds of really important stuff. If you check out a link below to a video where I talk more about magnesium and why it's so important, but that's one of the specific electrolytes that if you're deficient in it, and most people are, then that can really set you back. And you know, that's an important one to know because it's one of the easiest things to address out of the things we talk about. Anyway, next, lack of movement and incorrect breathing. And I shared those together because again, they're kind of related. If you move a lot but breathe really badly, it has some effect, but not that beneficial. Whereas if you breathe really well, even if you don't move a lot, then you're in a better position. So breathing is really important, but the movement is important too. So the level of constipation that we have in our modern day society is way beyond what the vast majority of us ever would have experienced. And that's for a few different factors, right? A lot of which we're addressing right now. Generally, though, a lot of our ancestors didn't eat particularly well in the sense that we might think of as well. They just didn't have the access to as much unhealthy but tasty food that we do, so they didn't overeat and binge as much unhealthy food as we do. So that's a factor, but the most important factor probably is that most of our ancestors used to move. You know, we are designed to move throughout the day. We're designed to walk like 4, 6, 8 hours a day. There's all these reports these days saying that sitting all day is worse for you than smoking like 10 or 20 cigarettes a day. Like, it's really, really bad for you to not move. That's what we're discovering recently in science, although, you know, it's been understood a long time in other traditions. But when you don't move, part of the issue is that again, movement stimulates peristalsis. It stimulates this movement of waste and nutrients through the intestines. Movement also helps to build up carbon dioxide, as does breathing correctly. So the way most of us breathe, we overbreathe, and so we do not ever have enough carbon dioxide to transport enough oxygen from our red blood cells into the mitochondria, into the energy factory of every cell of our body that creates ATP, which is energy. And so because of the lack of movement, just moving your muscles builds up carbon dioxide, breathing correctly builds up carbon dioxide. Most of us are doing neither. We're not moving very much, and we're breathing wrong. And when we do exercise, then we overbreathe. So the benefit we get from that is minimal. Yes, it's kind of moving the body around a bit, and so that stops the intestines stagnating too much, but it's not nearly as beneficial as when you do breathe correctly. When you breathe correctly, when you have enough carbon dioxide, that stimulates a lot of peristalsis. So this is one of the big factors as well, which we'll talk about a little bit when we get to the permanent solution. Another crucial factor and another part of modern day living is chronic stress, right? It's really important to understand the difference between acute stress and chronic stress. So acute stress is having shocking things happen, having alarming things happen. And acute stress is actually good for you, as long as it doesn't harm you, whether it's physically or psychologically or whatever. So trauma is not good for you, but short, sharp shocks that you have chosen to do are actually really great for you. So things like putting yourself outside a comfort zone, doing public speaking, talking to a stranger if that's something that would be challenging for you, getting into an ice cold water, running up a hill, whatever, right? These short, sharp shocks are really good for you. And that's partly, again, talking about our ancestors, because our ancestors' lives were, as far as we understand, were a lot of very were a lot of very stress-free and then occasional peak stress, right? And we can still see that if we observe the animal kingdom. When you watch a documentary, it kind of looks like it's all, chasing and life or death situations, but those guys who film that have to sit around for months or years to get that footage, to get those few exciting moments. The vast majority of the time it's just boring. And so why do we have that chronic stress? We're actually safer than we ever have been. In the Western or developed world, you're much less likely to die of a violent death than you ever have been throughout history. There's lots of reasons not to be stressed, but of course the reason we are chronically stressed more than ever, or at least a big reason, is because of media, right? And there's nothing against media, I'm just saying it like it is, right? The reality, with the media we have access to way more knowledge and information and connection, loads of great stuff. But what comes with that is that our brain is hardwired, and our natural selection has selected for those of us who are good at focusing on potential threats. Because when you focus on potential threats, you're more likely to survive and pass on your genes. So we have a super focus on anything that could be threatening. And of course, people who create media, they take advantage of that, whether it's the news, whether it's movies, whether it's anything. All of that stuff, it takes advantage of that tendency within us. So basically, we never have a reason to not be anxious. We never have a reason not to be annoyed, right? There's stress always. We just got to pick up our phone, beep, 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 whatever. I know phones don't beep anymore, but you know what I mean. And we can find a reason to be stressed. It's that instant. And then plus, economic reasons to be stressed, the income inequality, all of that kind of stuff, people not being able to pay their bills. But, everything. I didn't mention that first because that doesn't apply to everyone, whereas the media thing seems to apply to everyone. But all of these reasons to be stressed, right? And what happens when you're stressed? Well, when you are not stressed, you are in a rest, digest, reproduce, and rejuvenate state. So that's when you rest, you recover, you are more likely to want to reproduce or do activities related to it, and you're more likely to digest better. And so in order for peristalsis to work, now, you've probably found this practically, forget the theory, right? Have you found that if you're really stressed or if you're really anxious, you may well be able to pee, maybe more than usual, but it's much more difficult to go and defecate. It's much more difficult to have a bowel movement, right? And so that is what I'm talking about. That is chronic stress. Chronic stress is a killer for constipation. So the next thing to be aware of is chronic abdominal tension. And this one rarely happens in a vacuum without these other factors as well. But let's go back to incorrect breathing for a second. So what does incorrect breathing mean? There's a lot to that, and that's why you've got to check out the video underneath to get the full scoop. But one example of how to breathe incorrectly is to breathe from the chest. So meaning when you breathe, it's up like that and down like that, and the belly stays flat, right? In, out, out. That's incorrect, right? Correct is where you breathe in and your belly goes out. Breathe out, your belly goes in. Right? Now, How many times do you breathe per day, right? You can get the calculator out. It's a lot, right? Probably too much, in fact, but that's a different story. Anyway, so you breathe a lot. So imagine every physical movement, if you were breathing from your belly, that would be like massaging the intestines and helping that peristalsis movement, helping it through. If instead you were holding your belly tightly for whatever reason, a lot of people do it because they want to look good, they think they want to keep a fat stomach, but then it becomes a habit even when they're not around other people. But a lot of people do it as well because everyone tends to hold emotions that we don't want to feel as patterns of tension in the body. And so feelings of fear, anxiety, paranoia, those kind of feelings especially tend to reside in this kind of area. And so you may have noticed that again in practice. Like if you're in a very fearful situation, you kind of clench this area, specifically this area around the navel. So chronic abdominal tension is something that may well need to be addressed as well in order to really resolve constipation. And lastly, a weak or congested liver. And so this is one of the things that has been the most recent understanding for me, only in the last few years, but it's been a big breakthrough to understand that if either your liver's congested because you've just done so much bad stuff, right? You've taken so many drugs, you've drunk so much alcohol, you've eaten so much junk food, whatever, that your liver's just like struggling. Or it could be congested just because your intestines are blocked, even if you're otherwise healthy, right? I hear this from people all the time. Oh, I eat such a great diet and it's all organic and I've been doing it for years and yet I suffer from, and then they give me a big list of issues. How is it possible? They just don't get it. And that's because we're fed this lie. Like in the mainstream, we get fed the lie that diet is irrelevant and it has no impact on health, right? So that's obviously not true. But the kind of mainstream alternative health sphere tends to teach us that everything is down to diet, and if we just eat well, then everything is great. And it's a very tempting, popular message for a lot of reasons that I won't get to in this video, but it also happens to be completely untrue in most cases. Sometimes it's true. Sometimes all someone's going to do is just stop poisoning themselves with bad food, and everything else, your body just sorts itself out. That's wonderful. I haven't met many people like that, but maybe it's just because they don't find me. But it does happen, right? But the vast majority of the time, it's all of these other kind of factors, right? Like bad diet is only one of 8 that we've looked at. And so anyway, when we have that congestion of the liver, and this is one of the key things for me to understand, when our liver is just genetically weak, right? Like my mother had liver issues throughout her childhood, like medical issues, and then ultimately she got liver cancer when she was older. So I don't come from like genetics as someone who has like a super strong liver. And in fact, I'm a body type that tends to have weak liver. And so here's the thing to understand. All of the other things that we've talked about so far are what makes peristalsis possible, whether it's adequate hydration, adequate electrolytes, chronic stress stops it from being possible, of course. Incorrect breathing will inhibit it, tension will inhibit it. But the thing that actually causes peristalsis in a like why is it happening right now sense is where the liver via the gallbladder squirts bile into the intestines. And so it's that bile that stimulates the peristaltic process. And so when your liver is congested and or weak, it is not able to release very much bile, and so there's not very much peristalsis. So this is a really important, crucial factor as well. The best thing you can do for the liver is to clear the intestines. So it goes back to that thing. But there's some stuff you can do to help clear the liver as well. And I cover that more in the video. Again, link underneath for how to clear your intestines, your liver, and your lymph. Okay, enough theory. I hope that's interesting to you, and it's important not to skip that so you really understand what's going on inside your body. But if you're suffering constipation, of course, what you really want is a solution and one that works straight away. So that's what we're going to be covering in this section. So first recommendation is to rehydrate. And so that could be as simple as just drinking more water or drinking more non-dehydrating fluids. But often it's not as simple as that. And so that's why I've got a whole video that explains the intricacies of how to rehydrate yourself once you've become dehydrated. It's not as easy as I wish it was. But that's something really important and kind of fundamental. And yes, it could well be, you know, especially if you're not doing the more basic stuff, that if you just never drink water and you're constipated and then you drink a few glasses of water, it will almost certainly help, right? Even though it's in and of itself, it may not be enough to resolve the problem, it's definitely helpful. So at the least, rehydrate yourself, drink some water, right? If you've really been drinking tons of water, just seems to go straight through you, doesn't help, then that's the more complicated kind of situation, which I address in the video that talks about hydration. So check out the link for that. Next is a colonic or an enema. And so a colonic is basically where a tube is inserted, water goes in there and it flushes it out. Enema, same thing. Difference is a colonic, someone else will do for you. It's much more of a deep clean, there's pressure applied, and it's, as long as it's done by someone who knows what they're doing, it tends to be a lot more effective. The advantage of an enema is it's cheap or pretty much free if you clean and reuse the piece of equipment that you need for it, and you can do it any time. You don't need anyone else to do it with you. So, you know, each of them have benefits. Overall, colonics are better. If you have huge resistance to the idea of doing this, I completely understand. It's certainly not something that I would have done if I weren't desperate, frankly. But I was suffering with all kinds of stuff that I kind of intimated a little bit earlier. Intestines are blocked, but also, you know, inflammation in there, candida, parasites, food intolerances. There was a big list of foods that I couldn't eat and a much smaller list of things that I could eat without it making me literally become ill. You know, so I was desperate, and so I tried it, realized it wasn't actually that bad. Since then, I trained in how to do it, and have seen cases of people whose lives have absolutely been transformed by doing a series of these and doing them properly. Now, we'll cover that in more detail in the how to fully unblock your intestines, your liver, and your lymph. So check out that video for more information about that. But I just want to address the whole point about it's not natural, right? Because that's the most common, I mean, the most common thing you probably hear is, I don't want to do that. That sounds unpleasant, which I understand. And as I said, that's just like, it's up to you how desperate you are that you want to try something like that. And really, it's not so bad at all. It's not enjoyable, but there's a lot of things that aren't enjoyable. But, you know, I don't enjoy brushing my teeth, but I do it to be clean in my mouth. And so the other most common objection you hear is that it's not natural, right? Well, I'll just use a different example than I usually do, but brushing teeth. Brushing your teeth isn't natural. You don't see primates do it, as far as I'm aware. You don't see any other animal brushing their teeth. Why should we do it, right? And there are some people who don't need to brush their teeth, even weirder. They have such a healthy microbiome, they never brush their teeth. They can even eat bad foods, and somehow they never get tooth decay, never get a cavity, right? So, and that's someone who maybe has a microbiome, a level of bacterial intelligence that is stronger and more like an ancestor who wouldn't have had to brush their teeth. Anyway, same kind of principle with the large intestine, right? Yes, it's not natural to do a colonic or an enema, but how much of your lifestyle is natural, right? Is it natural to use electric lights to stay up beyond when the sun goes down? Is it natural to not be breathing fresh air, or even to be breathing like treated, air-conditioned or heated air all the time? Is it natural to have an abundant, never-ending supply of food whenever you want it, that's highly refined and processed? Is it natural to never, you know, be grounded, never actually touch the earth, always be insulated from it? I could go on. Is it natural to never get sunlight, etc., right? I could go on, you get the point. So we don't live a natural lifestyle. A lot of this stuff, other than maybe dehydration, which I think has always been a challenge for our ancestors, finding good quality water, which is why there was always like water seems a sacred thing because it's so beneficial and it's not always easy to get hold of, right? But everything else, all of these are signs of or due to modern living, right? So if we're doing all this stuff of modern living, which is not natural, then sometimes we have to do something unnatural. Don't have to, but it'd be greatly beneficial to do something, you know, quote unquote unnatural to actually resolve the situation. Anyway, so I said my piece on that. Definitely recommend it. More details in the video underneath. Next, this can be really effective. Drink fruit and or vegetable juice, or actually smoothie is just as good, if not better, actually, because it's got more fiber in. Generally, I recommend vegetables over fruit. In this case though, if you can handle a lot of fruit, it's actually more effective for this specific purpose. So if I were to get dried out, like for instance by like a long haul flight, one of the things that I will do is make a Vitamix jug full. It's about 2 liters, half a gallon for my American friends. Fill it up with a bunch of fruits, a bunch of water, maybe some superfood stuff, whatever else you want to put in there. But like emphasis on the fruit. Blend it up and drink it just over a period of time, however long it takes to drink. Don't guzzle it down. Like could take you an hour or two. Fine, all right. That's really effective at giving you a clear out, especially if you combine it with these other things. Like, as much as Colonic and Enemas are pretty much like magic, I can't say the word cure, solutions for these kind of situations, right? Even then, sometimes they don't work if you're really blocked, and especially if you've got a lot of gas and stuff like that. When you have a large quantity of vegetable and especially acidic fruit juice, it just kind of flushes right through you and pushes it through. Lemon juice, yeah, to some degree, but I find the berries are really great. Any and all berries, blueberries, cherries as well, that kind of thing. Also great is dragon fruit, kind of hard to get hold of. Also known as pitaya. Sometimes you can get it frozen, sometimes you can get it fresh. That's probably like the ultimate fruit for unconstipating yourself. Avoid more things like banana, mango, that kind of thing. Melons are good for a clear out. So often papaya is good for digestion. So my favorite might be a combination of watermelon, papaya, and berries and dragon fruit if available, right? I say all of this though, knowing that it's not a good advice for everyone. Would it be good advice for me 10 years ago? If you have blood sugar issues, then it's not necessarily a good idea. If you have digestive issues, that means it's not a good idea to do food combining, then you would kind of follow my instructions, but just only do the fruit, right? Not do anything else with it. So if you have blood sugar issues, not great. If you have candida or any kind of fungal, mold, whatever kind of situation you've got, but anything that is made worse, any kind of infection that's made worse by even natural fruit sugar that a lot of people do, then it's not a good idea. But if you can do it, if it's a good idea, that fruit combination that I just recommended, or really any fruits, especially the sharp fruits, pineapple as well, if your mouth can handle them, are really, really good. Otherwise, vegetable, and if you can handle a bit of fruit, as much fruit with it as you can handle, fantastic too. Still way better than most other things that you can have. Next is magnesium. So I mentioned earlier that in a way you could see constipation as like a direct sign of magnesium deficiency. And so when you don't have enough, magnesium is a mineral, it's a basic building block, it's something that is essential. Your body can't make it itself. Like if you have a really healthy microbiome, there's a lot of different things that can be made for you if you don't have enough of them, but magnesium is as essential as it gets as a building block. Most of us are deficient in it. We don't have enough in our diet because we eat processed foods and because agricultural methods mean that there's less and less magnesium in even the healthy foods that we eat. Magnesium is a whole thing. I won't get into a huge thing about it here. You can check out a link below this video where I talk more about magnesium and how important it is. Of course, a lot of products that actually are laxative products contain magnesium. So if you take magnesium orally, up to a certain level, it's actually providing nutritional value to it. Over that certain level, your body's not able to absorb it anymore. And the general consensus is that it's just wasted. Like you don't overdose on it, but what it does is water draws water to it like massively, like a sponge. And so if you take too much, like more magnesium than you need, or more technically accurate, more magnesium than your body can assimilate and absorb at any one time, then the excess of it will be in your intestines and attract a lot of water towards it. And it also irritates the intestines to some degree, and which causes peristalsis because your intestines are irritated and they want to get the irritant out. And so that's how it works as a laxative. So it's in between like a herbal laxative that work in various different ways. One way they work is that they're irritating the intestines again. That's not so good. Some herbal laxatives work by stimulating your liver to release some bile, which, as we said, kind of starts the peristaltic process. Don't recommend any of these compared to these steps. These are far more natural, right? You don't have a like Centipod deficiency, but you may well, or you probably do have a magnesium deficiency. You might have a deficiency of the kind of good healthy nutrients that are in fruit or vegetable juice. So I definitely recommend some form of magnesium. If you want to get one that's completely safe in this regard, I totally recommend the Rejuvenate brand of transdermal magnesium that we have available that basically goes in via the skin. And so this is the most effective way to absorb magnesium other than via injection. That's the only, and it's only slightly more effective way, but much simpler. Just spray it on your skin, gets absorbed straight into the bloodstream. Very effective. You can specifically spray, now most magnesium transdermal sprays are bad quality, honestly. They don't work. They just leave like a residue on them, which is why the version that we have is particularly effective, because you spray it on yourself, it doesn't leave any residue, you can feel it being absorbed, and it feels, if you're sensitive, you notice its action immediately. So with that, you kind of spray it on yourself in general, but you can also spray it specifically on the belly area, front and back. Not only does it help with peristalsis, but it also helps with chronic tension. So it can be useful in that sense as well if you do have that tension around the abdominal. So for more information about magnesium and that magnesium specifically, check out the link underneath. Next recommendation, baking soda. I usually refer to it as sodium bicarbonate, its technical name, but a lot of the time people don't understand what I'm saying, and even if they do, then they go to the store and ask for it, and the cashier doesn't understand what they're saying. So baking soda, everyone knows what that means. Sodium bicarbonate. So again, like with magnesium, it is a completely natural thing that exists in your body all the time already. Unlike magnesium, it's something that your body does create for itself, but here's the thing. Most people are deficient in internal sodium bicarbonate for various reasons. Basically, it's the pancreas's job to provide the sodium bicarbonate as well as pancreatic enzymes to balance the acidity of the stomach acid. So that's how that works. But the challenge is when a person is overall suffering with an excess of acidity because of, for instance, because they have backed up intestines, they have pathogenic organisms, they've got rotting inside of them, all of these issues, because they've got incorrect breathing, that relates as well in ways that you understand if you watch that video. So all of these things together create excess acidity. When there's excess acidity, your body's got to create more baking soda to keep up with it, and most of the time it fails. And from my perspective, issues with the pancreas, which ultimately lead to insulin resistance and even type 2 diabetes, are not only rooted in sugar abuse, although that is definitely a hugely important factor. They're also rooted in an excess of acidity. And so this is why it's been found that things that don't really affect blood sugar significantly, like eating a lot of poor quality animal food or fried foods, even though it doesn't affect the blood sugar significantly, but it does affect the pancreas's struggle with producing enough sodium bicarbonate. So it's really a supplement, right, to add some sodium bicarbonate. The disadvantage of that is you do have to actually consume it, whereas with the magnesium you can just spray it on you, so that's totally safe. With the baking soda, I really only recommend doing it, and really only do it myself, first thing in the morning. Generally that's when you're the most acidic, so make sure to have it with plenty of water. That's kind of like the most basic instructions for like rehydrating. But again, it's a very serious, effective thing which can make up for a biochemical imbalance. There's books and websites and all the rest talking about how you can heal everything with it. I'm not going to go that far. There is some scientific research that says that, for instance, with kidney disease, that it's effective at healing that, but I won't claim that either because I'm not an expert on kidney disease. But I will say that baking soda, along with magnesium, these are like two very basic things like hydrogen, oxygen. So we talked about oxygen, we talked about hydrogen, we talked about carbon, we talked about magnesium, we talked about sodium. You know, these are like the basic building blocks of the human body that we struggle with a lack of, right? So that's a really, really easy way of helping yourself. It's incredibly cheap. You can get it anywhere. Try and get it from a good brand that talks about it being like 100% pure, aluminium free, stuff like that. But yeah, and if you want to find out more about that as part of an alkalizing strategy, again, check out the alkalizing video underneath this video. Next, and this one is a little bit more of a luxurious option. It's a little bit more costly, but it's fantastic if you're able to do it. Marine phytoplankton basically is the building block of all life on Earth. It is the bottom of the food chain. It contains every nutrient that you could ever need. And there's a particular type that I like. It comes in a bottle, and basically you just fill up a dropper full, squirt it in your tongue. It's quite an intense taste, so if you can't handle that, you can put it in a drink. If you add it to water or juice or something like that, you barely taste it, no big deal. But it has magnesium in it, it has sodium bicarbonate in it to some degree, small degree. It's got omega-3s, it's got all kinds of amazing things. But the other thing it has a very large amount of, which is why I recommend it for this specifically, is there's a large amount of chlorophyll, which is that green pigment. And that green pigment, for whatever reason, from what I understand, it's because it stimulates bile production again, but in a really good, healthy way, unlike with herbs that do it in a more harsh way. So I'm a huge fan of that. I like it as well because it's very practical. I can take it with me wherever I go. Like with the other things, you know, baking soda, it kind of looks a bit suspicious if you bring it through an airport. You know, it's difficult. You can't have it. You can only have it first thing in the morning, right? With marine phytoplankton, any time of day, you can take it with you anywhere. Just squirt, and you've got a complete superfood. Like it's got everything in that you could need. In a super absorbable form. That's why I like to squirt it under my tongue, even though it's got a little bit of a taste, is because it just gets absorbed sublingually straight into the bloodstream that way, because it's nanoparticles, and like you get a boost from it. It feels fantastic. But not only do you get a boost from it, if you have, you know, and it depends on the person, but if you have 2, 3 dropperfuls, something like that, it can make you immediately want to run to the toilet as well. That combination of the magnesium with the chlorophyll, with all the other nutrients, very effective. So I had to mention it. And the last recommendation, also really effective, is vitamin C. It's not my go-to thing because it does work more by irritating the intestines to some degree, but I added it anyway because, again, you know, there's no such thing as a senna deficiency, but there definitely is such thing as vitamin C deficiency. Vitamin C is interesting. We're one of the only animals on the whole planet that doesn't make our own. There's like us and a fruit-eating wombat and like a couple of other species. Like we're almost our own and not being able to create our own. There's a lot of talk about vitamin C, and this was, you know, a few decades ago now, but again, being like a miracle cure, can fix anything, can help with all these serious diseases. It's generally thought of as a thing that's good if you have a cold or a flu or anything like that. I have a kind of pet theory about that though, which is that the real reason that it works, or the main reason that it works for, say, something like that, if it works at all, is because it actually has that laxative effect. And one aspect of disease is that our intestines tend to be backed up. I didn't even get into that, but when our intestines are backed up, that means that also our lymph tends to be backed up. And the lymph is like the sewage system of the body, and that when your immune system is fighting different infectious pathogens and all the rest of it, the kind of corpses from that war will be kind of processed and dealt with by the lymph system. Now, unlike the liver, the lymph system does have other ways of excreting. So it can come out via your skin, it can come out via your nose, come out via your ears, like all of those kind of areas. But of course, that's generally, it's when it's backed up in the intestines that it starts backing up into all of these other kind of areas. So anyway, vitamin C, good for the immune system, maybe. Good for loads of other things, good for collagen, for instance, keeping you looking and feeling young, keeping your joints young. So lots of proven scientific benefits to it, and potentially very useful for this purpose as well. Not my go-to thing, but if none of these things are effective for some reason, if I really let myself get into a bad state, then that's something that's worth trying as well. So let's go to a permanent solution, right? These are all immediate things, right? You could do any of these, if you have them available, at least you can do any of them in the next few minutes and get benefit, you know, within seconds to, you know, hours at the most usually. Let's talk about a permanent solution. First thing, cut the junk out and eat right. One of the things that makes me a tiny bit reticent to share all of this super effective knowledge is knowing that some people, inevitably, human nature, are going to watch this, do these things, find out that they work to some degree, but then carry on eating junk food, carry on eating the wrong food for their body type, and they're not going to get like better, they're just going to be better than before, but not better as in like not having constipation anymore. So that's a shame, and I wouldn't want that to be you, right? So cut out the junk food. Don't make it harder for your body, right? It's got 1,000,001 different reasons that you shouldn't be eating that other than just constipation. I'm sure you know, right? But if this is the thing that you're interested in because you're still watching this video, then this could be the thing that makes you motivated to cut that stuff out and then look into eating right for your type. Again, check out video underneath for more info on that. Next one shouldn't be a surprise. I've alluded to it over and over again. If you want a permanent solution, you want to really clear out your intestines, not just your large intestine, which technically once your large intestine is clear, you are no longer constipated for that period of time, right? If you use the kind of usual definition. But when you're able to be, like I said, like have one bowel movement for every meal, then that means that your intestines are actually clear, or at least reasonably clear, the small intestine as well as the large intestine, right? And also even that your liver is clear. Because when your liver is no longer congested, that's when it's able, now some people, as I said, are genetically have stronger livers that produce more bile. Some people have weaker livers that produce less bile. But whatever you are genetically, if you're at the best that you can be, then your liver will be able to produce enough bile to keep the peristalsis moving, as long as you have these other factors dialed in to at least a reasonable degree. So the next two I'll cover together like I did earlier, exercise and correct breathing. As I said, it would be completely normal for most of our ancestors to be moving, especially walking, a bit of lifting stuff and putting it down again as well, for many hours a day, right? As close as we can get to that as possible, the better. Now, you know, I understand if you have an office job or whatever, or if you have a job where you have to drive all day, this is more difficult. But it's still like, take every opportunity you can. Like for instance, even with these videos, I could choose to be doing this like sitting down because it's more, you know, comfortable. But I choose to do it standing up because I can and because it's better, right? It's better for me. Ditto, you know, I have to do a lot of phone calls with my job. As much as possible, I stand up and with my headphones on, I walk around rather than sitting down. In fact, the only time I'm ever really sat down is where I'm sitting in front of a computer and typing. And even then, I know that there are ways around that. You can get a standing desk and even a desk where you are walking while you're, but I haven't worked that out yet. But anyway, a lot of the time, majority of the time I'm up and I'm moving. Even now, you know, part of the reason I'm moving around a little bit is not because I'm nervous or anything, not really. It's because I like to move, right? And even when there's no one watching me, I will, you know, on the phone, I'll tend to move. In fact, I'll move a lot more because I'm not trying to stay in frame. But, you know, move as much as you can, even doing the mundane stuff. And then, of course, actually exercise. Now, the actual exercise, like in terms of going to the gym and jogging for an hour, doing cardio, doing weights or doing whatever, right, is a little bit more tricky because if you don't breathe correctly, exercise can actually make you feel worse. And this is, from my perspective, this is why most people don't exercise. It's not because they're lazy and undisciplined and all that stuff. No. If you knew how to do it and have it be an enjoyable experience, you would, of course, do it again because you know, if you enjoy something and everyone's praising you for it, why the hell wouldn't you keep doing it, right? The only reason you don't do it is because it's a really unenjoyable experience. Why is it not enjoyable? Doing anything new and challenging is like uncomfortable to some degree, but the reason it is really challenging and uncomfortable is because you're not doing it while breathing correctly, right? And so learning how to do that first, from my perspective, is really key. And then when you know how to breathe correctly, then exercising is no big deal, no challenge, and just a pleasure, right? So definitely check out the video on correct breathing to find out about that. That's an essential part of getting better. And just got to touch on this as well, like this is the correct breathing is also super important because it addresses this issue of chronic stress, which then also helps with the chronic abdominal tension. When we breathe correctly and we have enough carbon dioxide, then it's almost like the best tranquilizer known to man in terms of like reducing stress. When I say tranquilizer, it doesn't like affect your mental clarity or your energy or whatever, but it super calms you down. Super like you can be confident, you can be clear, but you don't have any anxiety. I have zero anxiety right now. I rarely have anxiety, right? And that's part of that situation of having the breathing correctly. Now, when you breathe correctly as well, you don't build up that same abdominal tension for reasons we talked about earlier, right? So there's a lot of great things to be said about this in context of constipation specifically. Definitely, if constipation is an issue that plagues you, then I would strongly recommend that, yeah, you can do all this kind of stuff, and even if you cut out the bad foods, if you don't address the root cause, it's probably only going to be partially successful. It may be like majority successful, but the next level, the final level, is going to be really getting into that. As well as increasing your calming neurotransmitters. So the good news is that when you learn to breathe correctly, you fundamentally get out of that state of chronic stress, right? You're only stressed when you really need to be, not just as a way of life, like the vast majority of people are. So that's fantastic, and that's a huge improvement. The one challenge is that even when you do that, if during that time, especially because of drug use, and when I talk about drugs, I mean it could be coffee, could be sugar, could be cocaine, could be heroin, could be Ritalin, could be antidepressants, all kinds of stuff, right? It all messes with your neurochemistry. And most of those things reduce your level of calming neurotransmitters. What they do is the majority of the ones I mentioned anyway, if not quite all of them, they release calming neurotransmitters from storage, which makes you feel better temporarily, but then actually makes you feel worse overall. Or in the case of something else like an SSRI, what it does is it stops your body from reabsorbing those calming neurotransmitters, which short term can certainly make you feel better because there's more of them floating around in your bloodstream helping you feel good. But then long term, your body tends to get wise to this and just start making less. And this is why the very serious side effects from SSRIs come from as well. There is a better way, and it's one of the things, along with the correct breathing, that I've been so fortunate to find. It's been one of the absolute best things for my health, but also everyone in my life has benefited from this. It's an incredible thing. It's a technology that, by helping to restore a natural microbiome of the type that your distant ancestors would have had, those super strong guys that we mentioned a little bit, and girls who we mentioned a little bit earlier. One of the other reasons that our ancestors felt good, despite being, close to starvation and violent death at any moment, other than just the lack of media, the more profound reason is because they had different microbiome that produced different calming neurotransmitters at a greater rate that made them feel good despite the difficulty of their lives. And so we don't have high levels of those feel-good neurotransmitters anymore, or at least not as high as we used to. And this is the cause of the epidemic of anxiety, depression, unhappiness. It's not just all the external stuff. It's really important to understand that any happiness or lack of it that you feel is not due to the actual circumstance. It's not the person smiling at you, it's not the gift, it's not the slap around the face, it's not any of those incidents, it's your response to it, right? And so this is the tragedy and the kind of horror of depression, for instance, right? Is that even if your life circumstance is really great and you have lots of friends and lots of support and a great job and a great life and everything seems to be stacked up to make you feel good compared to a lot of other people, and yet if you don't have that neurochemistry in order to feel good, then you don't feel good, because that's like the fundamental basis of feeling itself. So this is a fascinating subject. The reason why I bring it up in context of constipation is because if you don't have enough of the calming neurochemicals, then your body is permanently in a fight or flight state, and or more accurately the fight, flight, freeze or fawn state, And of course, you can find out more about the whole stress thing by checking out the video with a link underneath this, which talks all about stress and how to resolve that. But if you have too much of a stress state and not enough of a parasympathetic state, which is a rest, digest, reproduce, and rejuvenate state, if you don't have enough of those calming neurotransmitters to mean that you're in that parasympathetic state, then your digestion kind of freezes up and you don't have that peristalsis to move things through. So, you know, we talked about that already when we talked about stress, but there are a variety of different things, as you can see, that can cause that, that constipation, that lack of peristalsis, that lack of moving things through. And so depending on which is the cause will depend on which of these recommendations is the most helpful. But of course, if you do everything that I recommend, or certainly all of the long-term things and as many of the relevant short-term things you can, that's where you're really going to have success. And then lastly, to address the issue of chronic abdominal tension, there's Qinei-san. So Qinei-san basically means internal organ massage, and it's a type of massage, a Taoist type of massage, Taoist being the same people who invented the yin-yang symbol, acupuncture, kung fu, qigong, things like that. So this is a Taoist internal organ massage, and so that sounds a bit intimidating, but basically it starts off with a belly massage, right? And one of the very first things that you do with this massage, which if you train in it, and something that my wife and I trained in to be able to help each other, and she works with other people as well, one of the first things that you do is move that tension out of the abdominal area, and also which then helps to stimulate the peristalsis and helps to move things through. So that can be a really beneficial thing to do as well. Generally, if you hold on to tension in your belly area, it's more likely to be kind of fearfulness. If you hold on to tension in your mid area, your solar plexus, it's more likely to be like anger and frustration. And if you hold on to tension a little bit higher up in the lungs and the diaphragm, that tends to be more sadness. But that's like a big generalization, obviously. So how can you tell if you have tension there? How can you tell if that's the cause? Well, you know, the very simple answer is just to have a little bit of a dig around in there yourself. This is not always telling, because sometimes the tension's like deep in that you can't see it, but for a lot of people I know, they only have to give themselves a bit of a poke in, you know, their abdominal area, and they're like, it's like agonizing for them. Well, if it's agonizing, or if it's even painful at all, which it really shouldn't be, to give it a bit of a, you know, to have a little bit of a dig around in there, also with the also around the chest and the rib cage, the organs, you know, you can feel around the liver, around the stomach. Like if any of that is painful at all, like it really shouldn't be. Like if you were perfectly healthy and completely in a natural state, then it wouldn't be painful. So that's another great way of being able to tell, okay, this is something that I would actually benefit from. Not necessarily guaranteed, because sometimes that tension is deep and we don't necessarily observe it. So the best thing to do is to actually just go for a session. And to find out more about that, check out the link to the video underneath, where I will teach you more about Qinei-san. Very, very valuable thing to know about. So thank you. I hope you enjoyed that. Hope it's of value to you. Please remember to subscribe, like, comment, share with anyone who you think's open to this, who you think will be helped by this. And I love your feedback. I don't always have time to answer all of it, but I read all of it. I really appreciate you, especially letting me know if you try any of this, what happens, does it help you, what does work, what doesn't work. Is there anything else that you've tried that has worked that you would like me and the other people watching this to know about? If so, great, post underneath. And if it's something that I haven't heard of, then I'll try it. And if it's something that is great or better than what I'm recommending here, then I'll do a future update video about it. What these videos are all about is finding and then sharing the very best solutions to some of the most common problems that people suffer with. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your attention. And definitely check out the other video resources that I link to underneath this one to dig more into these topics and really address some of these core issues that undermine our health and our well-being.